All right, we have Erica Rose here from the University of Nebraska at Omaha for a Rethinking Leadership through, can you help me out with the phrase, Erica, please?
Yes, it's a mouthful. Appreciative Inquiry.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to learning. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Tammy. It's nice to see you all. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to share time and space with librarians. It's one of my very favorite things to do. And our conversation today is really going to be authentic because every one of you brings unique experiences, ideas, perspectives, which means that this conversation looks a little bit different than maybe the last time I had this conversation. And that's one of the things that I really love about it. And in the spirit of capitalizing on the authenticity of our group, I recognize some of the folks here, but I would love to hear from each one of you and know where you're from, what you do, and I'm going to try to do math in public, which is scary, but tell me how long you have been working in the library profession. Lorraine, I see you just popped on. Can I have you go first?
Sure. My name's Lorraine Patrick. I'm one of the reference librarians with Bellevue University in Bellevue, Nebraska. And I have been a reference instruction librarian for 18 years at Bellevue University.
That is amazing. It's nice to meet you, Lorraine. Thanks.
Nice to meet you too.
How about Jody? I mean, Jody, we've been hanging out for a long time, but just for the collective, I don't know how long you've been in libraries, Jody.
Yeah, I am Jody Norton. I'm the Assistant Library Director at the La Vista Public Library. And I have been here for 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was a high school librarian before. So 14
And how many years were you a high school librarian?
Sorry, how many? Almost a full year. I left there to come to this job. So I left with about 3 months of school still left.
Okay, wonderful. Melanie, you want to introduce yourself to the crowd?
Hi, I'm Melanie Lopiccolo. I live in Illinois. I'm actually a UNO library science student. I'm graduating in December and I'm going on to get my master's degree. So second career for me. So I'm really excited.
And it's been what, 2 years you've been in the program, Melanie? Is that right?
2.5 years.
Okay.
2.5 years I've been in the program. So
we're going to count every day. She is counting because she graduates in December. So she'll tell you exactly how long it's been. Tammy, how about you? How long have you been in the business?
I was a public librarian at a little library for about 6 years. And yeah, I started the library in June, started college that August, got my library certificate, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, and master's degree in 2019, and then took this job as director for the Three Rivers Library System in 2020.
Okay, so six years. Sorry, how many?
About 8 years.
8 years. Okay, cool. Robin Bernstein, hey, I see you here. I know you've been in libraries for a while.
I have been. I'm probably the oldest person here. I'm the library director at Bellevue University. So I work with Lorraine. I hired Lorraine 18 years ago. I've worked at Bellevue University for 43 years. Hoping to continue that as long as my body holds out on me. But I thoroughly enjoy working in libraries and have been very active in all aspects of librarianship.
Wow, that's amazing. You've seen a lot of things in that tenure. Wow.
I have. I've been the director since '93, but I started at Bellevue University in 1978.
Oh, that is so cool. Yeah. Thanks, Robin.
Mm-hmm.
I see Elle Wiebel. I'm so sorry if I'm not saying the name correctly. And they may not feel up to participating, which is fine. I just won't be able to count your years in my little formula here, which is okay. And feel free to put it in chat. How about Alyssa?
It's actually Elisa.
Thank you for telling me, Elisa.
Yes, I have been I'm a circulation manager at the library here in Fremont, and I'm completing 5 years actually this month. So it's pretty exciting.
Wow.
And before that, I worked as a part-time library aide in the Kearney Public Library, and I had almost 5 years there. So
Elisa, I think we've met.
we've met a couple times. Yeah.
Really, that's really nice to see you again.
Yeah, I just haven't got a camera, but otherwise, yeah, I'm here.
Oh, good. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. Okay, and then Caitlin. Hi, Caitlin. Okay, well, even with just those numbers that I counted, I have over 110 years of library experience collectively in this room, which is pretty impressive if you think about it. That's a lot of knowledge. It also means we have some long ingrained habits that probably serve us in a lot of good ways. They allow us to be effective in how you lead your organizations and how you create connections between people and information. And it's really important that we own the habits that serve us well, capitalize on them, and use them to feed our work. And alternatively, we probably have some habits that aren't serving us as well. And thinking about what opportunities we have in reshaping those habits is part of the discussion today. So this whole idea about appreciative inquiry is hopefully something that we can use to allow ourselves to be even more effective in leading our organizations. I'm looking at a group of people who are already very effectively moving our profession forward, but there's always room for growth. And over the past 5 years or so, I've had this conversation several times with different groups. Part of the reason it looks different every time is because I learn and grow. I'm very much a work in progress, and I experience something that kind of changes or shifts my approach to this conversation. But something that has remained consistent for me is my conviction that there is a deep need for appreciative inquiry, certainly in the library profession, but really, I think in society overall. Disclaimer, philosophically, this is all pretty straightforward, even maybe simple, but in practice, it's all much more complicated, because knowing what good habits are is one thing, but actually putting habits into practice is quite another. All right, I'm not done asking questions yet. If you would, you can just get in the chat box if you would like for this one, but I have a couple of questions. So if you could pick 2 words to describe your leadership style, what would they be? And I'll put mine in the chat. I like to say empowering and nurturing. Open and enthusiastic. Oh, I love that. Inclusive. Fabulous. Honest and empathetic. Oh, I like that too. Holy smokes, we're creeping up on 150 years, including this new one. Awesome. Fair and supportive. Amazing. Mentoring and empowering. Flexible. Great. Supportive and directional. Wonderful. That would make a really cool Wordle. Next question. What's one thing that you personally need to feel supported in your work environment? I can't ever just pick one. Okay. Supportive, listening. Yeah, I think that's common to a lot of people, a good thing to be mindful of. Support. validation. Upper management support and team players. Thank you, Robin. Freedom. I hear that, Jody. Okay. Those are really interesting responses. And while there's certainly some overlap, there's also quite a bit of difference there. A couple of things that I want to tell you about how I think about leadership. First of all, I really and truly believe that leadership is embedded in every single of librarianship. It's not a conversation that's just for managers or directors. We lead in different ways in every aspect of our work. And the other thing is, I do not believe that leadership is one formula or one set of rules that's going to apply and be effective with everybody. Even in a group of, what do we have, 1, 4, 7, 8 people, there's a lot of difference here in what we need in order to feel successful. So I love the idea. I love how we've clarified and articulated our leadership style. That kind of inward focus, I think, is really important. But we have to make sure that that inward focus in knowing ourselves better allows us to then know others in a more meaningful way so that we can help individualize our leadership in a way that's effective. That's a lot of work to think about, working with every single person differently and really figuring out what everybody needs, which is why I think appreciative inquiry is a framework that can help us do that. There's some universal concepts in there that can be tailored to specific individuals. So with all of that, oh no, I do have one more question, the most important question. What is one challenge in leadership that's on your mind right now? That could either be a specific situation that you're thinking of for your library or the profession overall, or even the world. Change management and effective communication. That is an amazing response. Censorship, identifying needs. Okay. I'm going to write some of these down. Censorship. Yep. That's timely for Banned Books Week. I like it. Engagement. Just to clarify, Robin, do you mean engagement with your staff or engagement with your communities? Both. Okay. Great. Let me show you a definition of appreciative inquiry here. Go ahead and get started. So I've already covered a little bit of this without my slides. So we'll jump right to the definition. Here is appreciative inquiry in all its glory. Like I said, it's pretty philosophically simple and straightforward. It really is the act of recognizing the best in people and appreciating strengths and affirming what we do really, really well. That's the appreciating part of this. The inquiry is the act of true curiosity and really being willing to ask questions, and specific to Elisa's point, effective communication, listening, and then doing something with what we hear. Before I dive into dissecting all of this, I would like to just take a few minutes to underscore why I think all of this is really important. This is the symbol for infinity. And the reason that I put that there is because, you know, we've all been doing this collectively for 150 years. So we know that there are many challenges in our work. There's limited resources. You just stated some of your concerns. We're facing challenges with censorship, rapidly changing trends, to Tammy's point about how needs are changing. Our populations are increasing, they're declining, their information needs are changing. And at the heart of all of this is the fact that our work is completely focused around people on the other side of the service desk, people who are helping us provide service to our patrons. And let's be honest, people are really complicated. People are idiosyncratic. People are both wonderful and awful and exhilarating and exhausting. And knowing that we are facing challenges all the time and dealing with people who are requiring a lot of energy for better or worse, we have to be mindful of the fact that we're playing an infinite game here. Our work is never going to be done. In fact, the work that we're doing now feeds into things that will continue on long beyond us. And if we know that our work in libraries isn't a thing where we do X, Y, Z and then hit a complete box, we have to get comfortable with the idea that we're in it for the long haul. And we have to think about how we supply ourselves to be effective for this infinite game. We have to protect ourselves. We also have to protect our staff and our professional communities. And by doing so, it allows us to be better for the people that we're serving. But that definition I just showed you of appreciative inquiry has a big emphasis on being positive and seeing what is good. And that's important because if we let deficit thinking, which is the opposite of being positive, and we let problem focusing be this sustained part of our culture, then it is inevitable that we are going to run out of steam. We're going to get used up. Not only that, negativity, deficit thinking, it empties our buckets and actually has a direct correlation with a lack of an ability to be creative, a lack of energy, a lack of dynamic thinking. We need good juju for all of that. We need positive energy. So when we think about this and you think about everything that we're doing, compassion fatigue is a real struggle in our profession. Burnout is something that happens often in service professions. We get emotionally exhausted. So what do we do to lead people through all of that, above all of that? Okay, so the infinite game is one piece of this. Let's talk a little bit more about deficit thinking and this thing called the negativity bias. We are, it turns out, neurobiologically hardwired to focus on problems. For good reason. For a very long time in the evolutionary process, we had to make split-second decisions that determined whether or not we would live or die. Our ability to make a fire, gather food, find shelter was incredible, was it. That was what we had to think about in order to survive. And problem spotting and finding solutions is still very, very important. But what happens is we have developed long ingrained habits in which focusing on the problem has become the majority of our thinking, and it's what we're naturally compelled to do. And so now I need to take a minute and just talk about how harmful negative or deficit thinking really is. Rather than being cathartic, focusing on frustrations and problems has a deleterious effect that compounds over time. So for instance, I'm just going to talk about this idea of venting, or the patron that drives you nuts. And every time they come in, you have to talk about the patron that drives you nuts and all the reasons that drive you nuts. And we think that by doing so, that venting is relieving pressure and stress, but it's not. It actually compounds the stress and anxiety, and we just relive it every time we tell it. It's also catching. So when we say it, we've now passed on our experiences to other people who ingest all of that negativity, take it on as their own, identify it as a big problem that they need to focus on and pour energy into. It's also habit forming. And once we start and we become an organizational culture that's predisposed to this, we inevitably slide into dysfunction and toxicity. And so we have to be really mindful of when we choose to focus our conversation on problems. There's a time and a place for sure, but there's a difference between identifying and talking about problems just for the sake of venting versus truly addressing things in a spirit of finding solutions. That's actually quite positive, and they're different. Okay, here's some numbers that, we like numbers. We're librarians, we like data. This is taken from the 2019 Employee Engagement Report from this organization called Tiny Pulse. Take it with a grain of salt because, of course, they're taking a very broad look at professions across the United States. But here's what these numbers mean. Only a third of workers, less than a third of workers believe that they have a strong, healthy work culture. Less than a third of workers feel that they received recognition when they went the extra mile at work. Only about 26% of people in the workforce feel that they are highly valued. 33% of them actually feel undervalued. Those are kind of tough numbers. That indicates that we've got some pretty significant issues to address. But that 91% that you see at the bottom is actually really optimistic, because that statistic tells us that 91% of people care deeply about their coworkers. That's an important number. I think that if we care that much about the people that we work with, then we can fix these other issues that we have with a bit of intentionality. Here are a few resources that have guided my work with Appreciative Inquiry. So the first is the Golden Circle, and this is something that came from Simon Sinek, who's kind of a leadership guru, famous for his TED Talks and a lot of books. And I love this because the idea of why we do this work is something I think we often forget to talk about and celebrate. We focus a lot on what we're doing, how we're doing it, the basic tools and resources. We're all about it. We're not nearly as good at talking to people about how incredibly important this work we do is and what the impact is and the value that it provides to our community. I think additionally, why is an important concept when we're working in the leadership space, because people respond to it. Taking the time to talk to people about why we do something is actually one of the greatest signs of respect I think that we can provide. And particularly when we're working with younger generations, our millennials and then Gen Z, they don't accept traditional hierarchies in the same way as our generations did. They are much more interested in context and understanding the reason and the purpose behind what they're being asked to do. The other thing that has really shaped some of my interest in Appreciative Inquiry is Brene Brown's work. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Brene Brown, but she's written a lot of books. She's a social scientist who studies shame and vulnerability. And her research led her to this idea of how important trust is in our work cultures, and the fact that we need to understand what it means to invest in one another and funnel energy into developing trust. What's that really look like? We have a lot of work to do in our society when it comes to trust. We don't trust each other very much. And I think those numbers that we just looked at are a good illustration of all of this. Adding on to this, I was just looking through my code of ethics, our code of ethics with my students in class this last weekend, and our profession actually embeds this idea of caring for one another, lifting each other up, being positive. We embed this in our code of ethics. We understand that this is something that's deeply important throughout every level of our profession. So here we are again, back to the framework. And by this point, I'm hoping that I've convinced all of you that it's worth thinking about and considering. My previous comments touch on the importance of appreciative inquiry, and I'd like to just take a moment to really focus on the inquiry piece of this. It's about asking questions and really wanting to know what makes people tick. I was recently reminded just how important curiosity really is. The framework that that asks leaders to be truly curious, authentically curious, is something that I've seen kind of in all of the readings and TED Talks, and all the leadership folks are talking about this idea of being authentically curious about people. And I think we can apply that same thing to our work. And I think librarians are really good at that because we're trained to ask good questions. We just need to apply that to how we lead as well. So let's take a look at the process. Here you go. There are 4 phases to appreciative inquiry. The first one of those is discovery. You can think about this in what you yourself want to know more of when it comes to your strengths, skills. You can think about this in learning more about the teams of people that you work with. You can think about this in terms of what is good and celebratory in your organization. What do you do really well? That seems like such an easy, obvious thing, but articulating what you're really good at is the only way that you're going to figure out how you can then capitalize on that in your work moving forward. And the conversation is much different because we tend to focus a lot on what we don't do well. If I tell you 5 things right now that you're really good at, but I tell you one thing that maybe needs improvement, what you're going to remember and obsess over is the one thing that I said needs improvement. Again, we're hardwired to focus on those things. But think about what would happen is if instead of really focusing on that patron interaction that did not go well, the patron who did not have a great experience across our service desk, instead, what if we chose to look at the patron interaction that was a smashing success, an amazing embodiment of excellent customer service and information seeking needs met. And we looked at everything that went right there, and we figured out what can we do to make sure that we do this more often, every time. That completely changes the tone of the conversation and the way that you're going to approach your planning. So discovery, what is it that makes people great? Dreaming is this whole idea about what might be possible. If you're thinking about this in your library, it's what could we be? What could we do? How could we grow? Where are our opportunities? And when you're going through this process, it's anything goes here. Dreams don't have to be realistic. That's the beauty of them. And sometimes what doesn't seem like a reality can become one just because you dared to dream it. But nothing great ever happened unless somebody was willing to think that it might be possible first. I just got a weird message. It now says you're seeing my application. I'm so sorry to interrupt myself here, but can you see my screen okay? Okay, great. Then I'll just keep going. Design is all about kind of piecing together what you learned from your discovery and dreaming process. So once you know what you're good at, and once you've dared to think about what might be possible, you put those together, and then you figure out what your ideal really should be. And then the last piece of this is, how do you do it? What's the process for making all of this come true? Okay. Oh, well, I'll go back to the fact that that is cyclical. I don't know if you noticed the circle there, but that's one of those things where it's not that we do it and then we're done. We do it and then we start again. That's a really important part of appreciative inquiry, is that it's ongoing. So in order to do all of those things, again, it sometimes requires a complete shift in how we talk, how we think, how we interact. And so appreciative inquiry actually gives us some principles to help us with those conversations and with those interactions. And that's what you see here. So what I want to do moving forward is kind of go through each one of these things and then think about real world strategies, actions, scenarios in libraries in which this may come to life. Before I do that, I'm just wondering, does any one person, whether that's somebody famous or maybe somebody you happen to work with, come to mind as somebody you know does this? They're really positive. They're visionary thinkers who aren't afraid to say something radical, who are really empowering or uplifting. Has anybody experienced something like this, or Are there any great leaders from our time that come to mind? There are two ways that this question can go, and I think there's something to be learned either way. One, there's somebody who is mentioned, Martin Luther King. That is a great example. And I love that you said that, because what is Martin Luther King famous for saying? I have a dream. I have a dream. And people love to come together around a beautiful dream. That's very motivating for people. That's a great example. Anybody else? John F. Kennedy. He is actually one that I heard mentioned in some of the sources that I was looking at tied to Appreciative Inquiry before as well. Yep. Very empowering in the way that he communicated with people. It's worth thinking about. I really believe that in order to learn how we ourselves want to embed something like this in our own behaviors, it's worth spotting it. When you see somebody doing some of these things, being positive, who's masterful when it comes to asking questions and truly listening, make note of it. Watch what they're doing. See which pieces of it you can take to emulate in your own interactions and behaviors with people. Oh, that doesn't look good. Let's try that again. Okay. Those principles that guide our work through the 4D process are nicely defined right here. And again, I'm telling you, all of this feels like a piece of cake. If you're going to boil it down into one sentence, be positive. Much easier said than done, particularly when we live in a very stressful world and our work has a lot of challenges attached to it. But the first one of these is the Constructionist principle. I'm going to do this really fast because I know that you can read. But it basically is, we set the tone for any of our interactions, for the culture in which you work, for your environment, for your relationships. You create it through your language choices, through how you choose to respond to different questions. I've been trying this lately because I'm so inspired by all of this. Every time somebody says something negative to me and your response is, it is our instinct to connect with somebody by saying, oh yeah, I know, and I have this problem too. And I've been trying to stop myself from doing that and instead saying, yeah, but this is really great, or this nice thing happened, or this is something good that might come from this, or just not engaging and trying to connect through the negative, but instead spin it to an opportunity to connect over something positive. Yeah, I'm telling you, a work in progress. The simultaneity principle is basically this idea that the moment that you start to ask a question, the moment that you commit to investing in somebody by being willing to ask and wanting to know more about them, that creates change for better or worse. So being thoughtful with the questions that we ask, taking the right opportunities to ask good questions, that's the first part of creating change. And we make a lot of assumptions. We think we're good at asking questions, but a lot of times we make assumptions before we ask the question. We ask questions thinking that we already know the answer. I think a great illustration of just how powerful asking questions is, you know, I asked 2 questions and we all learned something about each other at the very start of this. You can do something with that information. Some of you will go on and continue to work together after this. You now all know that a good portion of the group needs validation to feel successful in their work. Great, you can do that. That's wonderful. Next is the poetic principle. And this really means that what you choose to focus on is what grows and becomes stronger. So that can work in two ways. If you are focusing on a big problem, or there's an aspect of your work culture that's become toxic, and you're focusing all of your energy on that thing, then that's what's going to grow. Alternatively, if you're choosing to focus on the exciting things that are ahead, the good, wonderful celebrations that you're doing now, that is what will grow. There's an awesome, I can't remember who did the webinar, but it was called Stop Complaining About Your Patrons, I think is what it was called. And they talked about how easy it is to complain about our patrons because they're frustrating sometimes. And they ask things that we feel are unreasonable, or we feel that they're not appreciative. And so we start to focus on that, and we want to complain about them as soon as they walk out the door. And that becomes then the focus of how we feel about our patrons. But when they started actually tracking their interactions with patrons to see how many of them were truly icky, wasn't very many. It was just a handful. And in fact, they had many, many more interactions that were very positive, or maybe just neutral, but that's fine. And they were allowing those few negative experiences to dictate their perception of their service community as a whole. That's not surprising because we know we're hardwired for it, but also deeply concerning because that means that it's easy for us to lose sight of all of the incredible things that we do and the amazing people that we work with. So thinking about how we're going to focus, and as leaders, I do think particularly directors, managers, supervisors, you are in a strategic position to set the tone and determine whether or not people focus on that negative space or if they choose to look at things proactively and positively. The anticipatory principle is the fact that we will move towards what we think the future is going to look like. If you believe that you can do it, then you will align your behavior accordingly. Alternatively, if you think that bad things are happening, that's how you're going to move and align your behavior. So creating a really positive, hopeful image for the future is important. Having good conversations about what's possible and what's exciting is important because that's how people are going to decide what their actions are. And then the positive principle really just sprinkles all over all of this, which is anytime that you can bring in that little aspect of something positive, we do it. I get pushback from this sometimes because I have been told that it can be a little too Pollyanna. It's not realistic. Not everybody wants to wave their pom-poms. I understand that. This doesn't look the same for everybody, and inauthentic positivity is counterproductive. But I think truly thinking about what's good and being willing to state those things is huge. I have lived this on both sides of it. And it is incredible how different it is to start a job and immediately be told everything that's wrong or that you need to watch out for, right? Sometimes we get that speech when you start an organization, watch out for so-and-so, watch out for this. We have a real problem with this. Versus starting at an organization that says, we have an amazing community. You're going to love this. While we have maybe some room for growth, there's so much potential here. There's so much potential here. I started a job once and my supervisor sat me down and she said, we are going to have a great time. That's our goal here. We're going to do work that we really, really enjoy. And we did. And it was amazing. The first things that come out of our mouth as we begin working with people set the tone. So to look at these things a little more in depth, how do we really learn more about people? How do we celebrate what is going really, really well? How do we make time and space for that and do it in a way that feels righteous for each authentic person? This is where those principles help us. So positive language, and then the simultaneity principle as well. Let's look at what those might look like. So I always wonder why we don't ask people what they need to feel supported, because I think this is really, really useful for all of us. something that I hear from people a lot is, I said it. I said it. I've said this 5 times. Nobody's getting this. Well, then maybe we need to think about whether or not we're saying it in the right way or in the right format or at the right time. Because, once I discovered that one of my employees really needed one-on-one feedback, that's what we did. Some people prefer having my written out feedback in a long email that they can return to over and over again. But let's just talk about what that looks like. What do you need to feel supported? Some people need a lot of one-on-one attention. There's nothing wrong with that. Other people, as we stated here, need a lot of autonomy and don't want a lot of one-on-one attention. Those are very different styles. We need to be mindful of that. I think another key aspect of this is asking our people to tell us what they're good at. Because what you see is limited by your own interactions with people. You don't have a comprehensive picture of anybody. Sometimes what people tell me they're really good at really surprises me. But then once I see it, once I hear it, I can start to see it. And I also have my own preconceptions about how certain skills might manifest, which means I'm not always looking in the right places. So it's very helpful for me when people tell me what they're good at and what they're passionate about. Once we do that on an individual level, we can take that to the team level and ask, what does our team do really well? Last folks I worked with at libraries, man, my team was so good at developing relationships. We excelled in that space. And we were so good at it that then we were asked to share that with some of the other teams in the library. We were not as good with some of the processes and procedures. I'm going to be very transparent about that, which was great because we had another team that was able to share some strategies with us. Good things happened because we had that symbiotic relationship happening. Okay, growth opportunities are a part of this. We've all got growth opportunities, but instead of thinking of them as I'm bad at this, I'm good at this, it just means maybe I'm behind on this with room to grow. It wasn't that something happened and it was awful. It was that something happened that I learned a lot from, and now I'm going to feed that forward into whatever's coming next. And then thinking about how we can use what we're really good at to maybe address some of our growth opportunities is another key piece of this. Okay, the reason that I ask about core values is because I think they're a huge part of figuring out what makes people tick. So this came from Dare to Lead, which is one of my favorite books that Brene Brown wrote. And she gives definitions and an exercise to take yourself through to figure out what your core values are. The reason that's important is because your core values are what motivate you. They're what makes up the inner fiber of your being, which means they are deeply important to you. When you feel like your core values aren't honored, it's going to feel, for lack of a better word, traumatic to you. You will be taken aback and it will be difficult for you to feel like you're in a place where you can be healthy and thrive. Or you might react more emotionally when you feel like your core values are being compromised. For instance, my core values, it's a big list, huge list. There's maybe 50, but you can only pick 2 or 3. That's really hard when you see things on there that you know are really good, like principled behavior or family or faith, all things that you're like, well, those things are important to me, but then you have to whittle it down to just 2 or 3. But my core values are kindness and joy and respect. And so when I see or feel like somebody is not being kind, it doesn't bother some of my friends nearly as much. But for me, kindness is so important that it's hard for me to move past that if I feel like people aren't being kind. Recognizing that in myself is important because I then can give grace when I know it's not as motivating for everybody as it is for me. But it also means that if I communicate that to the people who I work with day in, day out, to my loved ones, to the relationships that are important to me, they are set up to be successful in our interactions. And me knowing their core values allows me to be successful as well. So I think it's an exercise worth digging into. That was a much better way to say it. See, I should have just let Brene Brown say it for me. A way of being or believing that we hold most important. All right, the next piece of this discovery process, I think, is providing multiple opportunities for people to give us feedback. And I think that counts for every single person in our organization. We tend to have people that we connect with more naturally, who we feel have demonstrated their expertise. They're kind of our go-to folks, and we're always getting feedback from them. And those people are important. Those relationships are really important. But being sure that we widen our sphere of reference beyond the people that we usually hear from is very, very important. Everyone's feedback counts. Everybody has a different perspective of what's working, not working in your organization. Feedback can sometimes focus on the negative. So when we're asking for feedback, if you can channel that positively, that's helpful as well. I like to approach feedback a lot as our wins, our wishes, and our wonders, because all of those are really proactive, positive things that we can do something with moving forward. Celebrating people is also huge. Again, I know this seems so simple, but we tend to talk to people when there's something that needs to be fixed. I need to have a conversation with them about that. I know that that's not working well, or this is a point of concern. And it's not that those conversations don't happen, but if we have a conversation about what needs to be fixed, after we've had 5 conversations about things that we appreciate about somebody, that feels much different than if it is the only conversation that we have had with them all month, all year, whatever it is. Offering choice is another big piece of this. And that goes back to what I said earlier. People hear from us in different ways. As an instructor, well, all of us librarians, we think about universal design. How can we make our information resources, our facilities, our programming more accessible to people? How can you make your feedback more accessible to people? Do you give feedback to your employees across the desk where you're clearly in the chair that sits a little higher than they do? Maybe not even intentionally. Sometimes those barriers and the way that our environment communicates messages to people isn't something we were even thinking about. But if you need to have a hard conversation with somebody, you might want to consider removing those barriers and sitting beside them rather than across from them. This one's really exciting. Thinking with people about what might be possible. Again, I think in leadership, this is something that's unexpected. And it's an incredible way to validate somebody. When you make the investment in people to talk about what they might do, how they might grow, what they might achieve. I remember the first mentor that ever did that for me. And I was like, what is happening? Like and she would say, all right, we're going to talk about what the next 10 years look like for you. What do you want to do? What do you love? What do you think you'd really be good at? And it wasn't something that just happened once. Probably happened every 2 or 3 months. Naturally in conversation, it was just embedded in our interactions, and it's incredible. This is where that anticipatory principle becomes so important, because remember, whatever you see as the vision for your future is how you will then align your behaviors. So if you're talking to people and you know that they really want to become an expert in a certain subject matter, or they want to get that master's degree, or they want to get more management experience, they see themselves as a leader in the profession, then you can talk about that and they'll start aligning their behavior accordingly. So I think getting in the habit of future talk is something that we can do that's really helpful for people. And also for ourselves. It's really easy to get stuck in today and all the fires that we're putting out right now. I know that a lot of this just boils down to bandwidth and the amount of hours in the day. But future talk can happen informally just as much as it can happen formally. And if you're talking to somebody about like, hey, you did that program last night, you killed it. Like, that was amazing. Everybody was so excited. I loved it. Next step. What do you think about? I mean, do you see yourself maybe doing more of that? Was that exciting to you? Use that as an opportunity to just have a quick discussion about what they might be dreaming about. I think as leaders too, you're in a unique place where you can help match future trends in the profession with the skills, goals, and strengths that you are identifying in your conversations with people. So when you see the webinars coming and you say, you know what, Bob, this is something that you might be really interested in because I know this is something you're passionate about. We're going to get a lot more of this here in the future. Go to it. You knew that your friend Terry was really good at technology and the virtual space. And all of a sudden we saw virtual programming start to become a really big thing. It's time. It's time to help put that skill into action and feeding forward with that. Sometimes we get in the habit of saying no because it feels like everybody's asking for something from us all the time and we're trying to protect ourselves. I think that's another habit that we need to be mindful of. Say yes whenever we can. If people are showing initiative, let's say yes to it. And let's build dreaming into our job descriptions. Let's build it into our evaluation processes. This is just a good illustration of, I think, the difference between, I know, Elisa, you mentioned change management as something that you were thinking about, and I agree. I think we got a lot of change happening right now, and we're not done. We're just getting started. So thinking about what positive future planning looks like versus what negative future planning looks like, it's quite different. And appreciative inquiry was actually first developed as a framework for change management. In fact, that's usually how it's spoken about. I just think that the principles are a little more universal. But you can see how different each one of these columns feels. Envisioning excitement, growth, improvement, inspired positive action versus foreboding, playing safe, ignoring, worst case scenario, and negativity. I mean, the words just jump out at us. And you know it. I know you've all lived both sides of this probably and have felt those differences. I won't spend too much time on this because we've already talked a little bit about negativity bias. Confirmation bias is right there along with it. It's once we see something and we have it in our mind, then we look for other things that confirm that thing, which is why it's really dangerous for us to live in echo chambers where everybody thinks and behaves and believes the same things, because we become ever more convicted that we are the right way. And so if you're in an organization that really believes that things aren't great and that this work is hard and people are a pain to work with, then that's what will be confirmed over and over again. There it is. That's right. There's the webinar right there. I didn't realize I'd put it in here. So how patron bashing is killing our spirit, and it is a virtual forum. It's amazing. It's totally worth 50 minutes of your time. I was just looking at my chat here, Elisa, and you say it reminds me that we need to celebrate the small wins. I really appreciate that comment. And I actually just want to take a minute here because I think it's worth acknowledging what small wins actually looks like. So if you would humor me, could you tell me what a small win is for you? I mean, just an example of any small wins that any of you have experienced within the last week.
So, Erika, for example, it's in our library right now, we're having some problems with our print system, and it's hit or miss. Sometimes people can put in money and it'll give them their copies, and sometimes it won't. And so it's frustrating for our staff. It's frustrating, obviously, for the patrons. And so it's been my goal yesterday and today to just, when we had it work, I'd be like, okay, yay, we did it. and then it gives the patron a little chuckle, and then it makes, my part-time staff feel like they've really done something pretty cool, And so I feel like that's been, I don't know, something that I've been trying to do. And if it doesn't work, then I'll say, okay, well, we'll just print it on our end and no big deal, So that's just one example.
I love that example. I am very familiar with the amount of time and energy that goes to the printer. I feel like that's universal. I think that's a great example. And if some of you are sitting there thinking, okay, small win. One, I know it's tough to be on the spot and having to think like that. But two, Getting my kids to school on time. Love that win, Jody. I love it. Yes. I had a similar moment last week when I remembered to send the check for my daughter's orchestra uniform the day it was due. And I was like, yes, I did it. I remembered. That's amazing. But I think, you know, the fact that it takes us a minute to sit here and say, all right, what are my small wins? What are my small wins? It's an opportunity for us to say to ourselves, oh, maybe I could spend more time thinking about that. It shouldn't be this hard for me to think about my small wins. Learning that I'm succeeding in our after school program, the kids are happy to get to our library. Awesome. That's amazing. Just seeing smiles in that after school program, I would consider not even a small win, but a big one. That's pretty cool. Any other small wins?
I have one more that we do here. This is something, I used to be a teacher, so maybe I brought some of that with me.
Love
But
it.
we have, we call it a Kudos Board for our staff here at the library. And that's just, you know, like if I notice one of my people really going out of their way to help that patron with that, you know, complicated print job, or finding that book that was eluding them, or you know, what have you. You know, if I notice that, then I'll say, you know, great job, Erica, for helping that patron, or, you know, thanks, Tammy, for being, you know, good at customer service. And so it's just kind of nice for us to feel recognized for things. And, you know, it's nice, like for me as a supervisor, I don't really expect a whole lot, but it's nice to see sometimes my name where people recognize that I go out on my way to ask patrons if they're okay, or, you know, the Spanish speaking ones where I make myself available and, you know, in both languages. And it's like, oh, yay, I made somebody happy.
I love that. And I actually think you bring up a good point. I see this other chat here, Kelly, where you say having kids who come in and kept saying thank you when you help them find books. I think that's huge. That's that validation piece that's so important. Elisa brings up a really good point too, though, and that leaders also need validation, because we don't know if we're getting it right either. And so thinking about how we can express to the people who are leading us when they're getting it right, I think that's important too. It goes both ways. Wow, I am really running short on time here. So, because we're doing an hour, isn't that right, Tammy? Just double checking. Yes. Okay. So super quickly, I don't know why that keeps happening. That's terrible. We're just really the design, the discovery and dreaming phase are really, really important aspects of this. And so you can move really quickly through the final pieces, because design is all about how we bring those things together. Now that you've discovered what's good, you're taking those small wins, you've dreamed about a future that's bright and beautiful and amazing. How do you piece those things together to figure out what it really needs to look like? What's your organization going to strive for? And that again gets a lot to the poetic principle, which I like to bring up because some people see a duck, some people see a rabbit, and whichever one of those words I said first probably changes how you see it. So what we choose to focus on, this vision just becomes more and more clear. So helping people find that positive vision is really, really important. A lot of these strategies are similar to what we looked at in discovery and dreaming. Regular invitations for feedback, democratic brainstorming, lots of trust, lots of choices for people, whether that's in how they provide feedback, how you interact with them, or even giving them choices in what role they'll play in the design. And then destiny is just all of this comes to life. You've dreamed, you've discovered, you've figured out the ideal, and now you just make it happen. And so when we're in the process of living out our design, we have to put that appreciation and inquiry process into practice heavily. A lot of asking, listening, sharing, a lot of valuing all of the different strengths that people bring, figuring out how to capitalize on those, and evaluating. I think asking people often what's working, where can we grow, is a big part of this. So I'm going to skip through all of this and just talk for a quick minute here about frustration, because sometimes people say, yeah, okay, but we do get frustrated from time to time. And frustration really does serve a purpose. It helps us figure out what's not working and problem solve. But to what I said earlier, taking frustration from venting for the sake of venting and turning it into an opportunity to productively find solutions to problems, that's much different. So some people are skeptical about this, but I hope that you're all starting to think about when you've seen this at work and how that feels different from when you've maybe lived or existed in an environment in which it's kind of toxic. I'm not saying that we don't hold people accountable to standards. I believe in high standards and accountability, but I am advocating for transparency in how we set expectations, how we get feedback from people, how we look for opportunities to work with each individual person according to their own authentic needs, strengths, etc. And I think if we live in a culture of positivity, the problem solving that we have to do is going to feel different. It feels proactive. It feels positive. So just this quick summary of everything that we did. You know, we talked about the move away from inward focused leadership that's all about putting out fires. The idea being that we create work cultures that are thriving and productive and sustainable. And we talked about appreciative inquiry as a framework, 4 phases. Discover everything you can and celebrate what's good. Dream about what might be possible, figure out what your ideal is, and then use that to live out whatever that vision is for your organization. And really, that's it in a nutshell. I know it requires a lot of investment in people, but I think it's worth it. And I think that as librarians, you are predisposed to doing it because you're the most compassionate people I know. Okay, I'm 2 minutes over, sorry. I'm going to put my email here in the chat box. If you have any questions, I'm so happy to, I love talking about this stuff and I would love to talk through any questions. I would love to hear from any of you. If you have any small wins, I love that too. It's really nice to see you all.
Yeah, this was awesome, Erica. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity, Tammy. I appreciate it. I know conference is coming up. Everybody enjoy.
Will you be there this time, Erica?
You know, I'm not able to make it, but my partner in crime, Dr. Cast, will be there. So, and she'll have lots of good bling and goodies. So make sure you stop by the booth and grab our free stuff.
Sounds good.
Bye, Melanie. Good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Erica. It's good to see your face.
Thanks. You too, Jody. Stay in touch. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Erica. Such great information.
Oh, good. I'm so glad, Tammy. Thanks again. I'll see you for the next round.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll send you the recording too.
Oh, okay. Thanks. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.